General defenses under law of torts. Part 2. Private defense. The law has given permission to protect one's life and property, and for that, it has allowed the use of reasonable force to protect himself and his property. The use of force is justified only for the purpose of self-defense. There should be an imminent threat to a person's life or property. For example, A would not be justified in using force against B just because he believes that someday he will be attacked by B. The force used must be reasonable and to repel an imminent danger. For example, if A tried to commit a robbery in the house of B and B just draw his sword and chopped his head, then this act of A would not be justified and the defense of private defense cannot be pleaded. For the protection of property also, the law has only allowed taking such measures which are necessary to prevent the danger. For example, fixing of broken glass pieces on a wall, keeping a fierce dog, etc. is all justified in the eyes of law. Mistake. The mistake is of two types. Mistake of law. Mistake of fact. In both conditions, no defense is available to the defendant. When a defendant acts under a mistaken belief in some situations, then he may use the defense of mistake to avoid his liability under the law of torts. In Morrison v. Ritchie & Co., the defendant by mistake published a statement that the plaintiff had given birth to twins in good faith. The reality of the matter was that the plaintiff got married just 2 months before. The defendant was held liable for the offense of defamation, and the element of good faith is immaterial in such cases. In Consolidated Company v. Curtis, an auctioneer auctioned some goods of his customer, believing that the goods belonged to him. But then the true owner filed a suit against the auctioneer for the tort of conversion. The court held auctioneer liable and mentioned that the mistake of fact is not a defense that can be pleaded here. Necessity. If an act is done to prevent greater harm, even though the act was done intentionally, is not actionable and serves as a good defense. It should be distinguished with private defense and an inevitable accident. The following points should be considered. In necessity, the infliction of harm is upon an innocent, whereas in case of private defense the plaintiff is himself a wrongdoer. In necessity, the harm is done intentionally, whereas in case of an inevitable accident the harm is caused in spite of making all the efforts to avoid it. For example, performing an operation of an unconscious patient just to save his life is justified. In Lee v. Gladstone, it was held that the forcible feeding of a person who was hunger striking in a prison served as a good defense for the tort of battery. Statutory authority. If an act is authorized by any act or statute, then it is not actionable even if it would constitute a tort otherwise. It is a complete defense and the injured party has no remedy except for claiming compensation as may have been provided by the statute. Immunity under statutory authority is not given only for the harm which is obvious but also for the harm which is incidental. In Vaughan v. Tafvald Rail Company, sparks from an engine of the respondent's railway company were authorized to run the railway, set fire to the appellant's woods on the adjoining land. It was held that since they did not do anything which was prohibited by the statute and took due care and precaution, they were not liable. Absolute and conditional authority. The authority given by a statute can be of two types. Absolute. Conditional. In the case of absolute authority, there is no liability if the nuisance or some other harm necessarily results, but when the authority is conditional it means that the same is possible without nuisance or any other harm. In the case of Metropolitan Asylum District v. Hill, the hospital authorities, i.e. the appellants, were granted permission to set up a smallpox hospital. But the hospital was created in a residential area which was not safe for the residents as the disease can spread to that area. Considering it a nuisance, an injunction was issued against the hospital. The authority, in this case, was conditional. Conclusion. This article is to emphasize the important role played by general defenses in avoiding one's liability in torts. While learning about tort, it is necessary to learn about general defenses in the law of tort. General defenses are a set of excuses that you can undertake to escape liability. In order to escape liability in the case where the plaintiff brings an action against the defendant for a particular tort providing the existence of all the essentials of that tort, the defendant would be liable for the same. It mentions all the defenses which can be pleaded in cases depending upon the circumstances and facts. In order to plead a defense, it is important to understand it first and then apply the suitable defense accordingly.